"You're too colored for my taste," the mail-order groom spits before abandoning the elegantly dressed bride at the dusty station platform. Townspeople circle like vultures, whispering that the abandoned woman will end up in the saloons or worse. No respectable future exists for someone caught between worlds. The sun beats down mercilessly as hours pass, her dignity the only thing standing between survival and complete ruin. Then the weathered rancher approaches with calloused hands and steady eyes, seeing past what others mock. His own failing ranch hangs by a thread, debts mounting like storm clouds, but something in her quiet strength speaks to his desperate need for partnership. What neither realizes: powerful men orchestrated this abandonment for reasons that could destroy them both. Will their hasty dawn marriage save them, or seal their destruction? The train's whistle pierced the morning air as Adeline Freeman stepped onto the platform at Clearwater Station. Her cream-colored wedding dress caught the dust from the wooden planks beneath her feet. She clutched a small carpetbag and searched the sparse crowd for a familiar face she had never seen. 3 hours passed. The sun climbed higher. Sweat beaded on her forehead beneath the lace veil she had sewn by hand during the long journey west. A man approached her bench. Tall, clean-shaven, wearing a pressed suit. Her heart quickened. This had to be Thomas Whitfield, her intended husband. He looked her up and down with narrowing eyes, his lip curled. "You're too colored for my taste." He turned and walked away without another word. Adeline sat frozen as the words hit her like a physical blow. Around her, townspeople began to whisper. A woman in a blue bonnet pointed. Two men by the general store shook their heads and chuckled. "Poor thing don't know what's coming. Won't last a week before she's working the saloons." What did she expect, coming out here looking like that? Adeline's hands trembled in her lap. She had sold everything back in Pennsylvania. Her teaching position at the colored school, her mother's china, the small house her father had left her. Every penny had gone toward this new life, this promise of marriage and respectability in the growing West. Now she had nothing. The station master avoided her eyes. Passengers from the morning train gave her a wide berth as they collected their belongings. Children stared until their mothers pulled them away. Hours crawled by. The sun reached its peak and began its descent. Adeline's stomach cramped with hunger, but she dared not leave her post. Where would she go? A wagon rumbled into view, kicking up a cloud of dust. The driver was a man with weathered hands and lines around his eyes that spoke of long days under the sun. He wore simple clothes, clean but well-worn. His hat was pulled low against the afternoon glare. Silas McAllister had come to town for his monthly supplies: feed for the cattle, salt, maybe some coffee if he could spare the coins. He guided his wagon past the station and caught sight of the woman sitting alone on the bench. She sat straight despite everything, her chin raised, her dress wrinkled but her dignity intact. Silas had heard the gossip floating through town: the abandoned bride, the cruel rejection, the predictions of her inevitable fall from grace. He tied off his wagon and walked toward her. Adeline looked up as his shadow fell across her bench. His face was kind but tired. Deep furrows marked his brow. "Ma'am," he touched the brim of his hat, "I'm Silas McAllister." She studied his face for signs of mockery, found none. "Adeline Freeman. I heard what happened, I'm sorry." Adeline's throat tightened. No one else had offered even that much. Silas glanced around at the watching crowd, his jaw set with determination. "I got a proposition for you. My ranch needs a woman's touch. You need a place to call home. We could make an arrangement, marriage in name, partnership in practice." Adeline searched his eyes. She saw loneliness there, desperation held in check, but also genuine respect. "I don't know you." "No, ma'am, but I know enough. You came all this way on faith. That takes courage. I got land and a roof, but I could use someone with your kind of strength." Adeline looked toward the town. More people had gathered to watch the spectacle. Their faces showed amusement and disgust in equal measure. What would you expect from such an arrangement? Honesty, hard work, someone to share the load. Silas paused. "Nothing more unless you wanted it someday." The station master approached them with obvious reluctance. Station closes at sundown. You'll need to move along. Adeline's pulse quickened. Sundown meant darkness. Darkness meant vulnerability. She had heard the stories of women left alone in frontier towns. "Preacher lives 2 miles out," Silas said quietly. "We could be wed before dawn if you're willing." Adeline thought of her careful plans, her dreams of love and companionship, the future she had imagined with a man who could not even look at her with basic human decency. Then she thought of Silas McAllister's steady gaze, his offer of partnership without demand, his willingness to stand with her when everyone else had turned away. Yes, the word came out stronger than she felt. By torchlight, they rode to the preacher's house. Reverend Mills answered his door in his nightclothes, grumbling about the hour until he saw Adeline's face. His expression shifted to something like pity. The ceremony was brief. No music, no flowers, just two people making promises in the flickering light of a dying fire. As dawn broke over the horizon, Adeline Freeman became Adeline McAllister. The ride to the ranch revealed the scope of Silas's struggles. Broken fence posts leaned at odd angles. Cattle wandered through gaps in the barriers. The barn roof sagged under missing shingles. Adeline cataloged each problem with the trained eye of someone who understood systems and organization. Her education at Oberlin had taught her more than teaching: mathematics, agriculture, business principles that could transform failure into success. But she kept those thoughts to herself, for now. If you are enjoying this story of how an abandoned bride's unexpected marriage will change both their fates forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next part at this struggling ranch will completely change everything they thought they knew about survival and partnership. The fever struck Silas on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after their wedding. Adeline found him collapsed beside the barn, his skin burning hot to the touch. She dragged him inside with strength she did not know she possessed. For 2 days she nursed him with cool cloths and what little medicine they had. His breathing grew shallow. His words became delirious rambling about debts and dying cattle. Outside, the ranch fell apart. Jake Morrison, the lead ranch hand, knocked on the cabin door on the third morning. "Mrs. McAllister, we got problems. The cattle broke through the north fence again. We're down to our last bag of feed. And that banker rode out yesterday asking questions." Adeline looked through the window at the scattered livestock, the broken equipment, the workers standing around with no clear direction. What did the banker want? Payment on the loan. Said if Mr. McAllister can't make it by month's end, the bank takes the land. Adeline's stomach dropped. Silas had mentioned debts but never the full extent. She walked to his desk and opened the ledger books he kept locked away. The numbers painted a grim picture, more red than black. Loans stacked on loans. Feed bills 3 months overdue. The ranch was bleeding money from a dozen wounds. But as Adeline studied the figures, patterns emerged. Inconsistencies that made no sense. Payments recorded but never deposited. Fees charged twice for the same services. Interest rates that jumped without explanation. Her mind worked through the calculations with the precision her mathematics professor at Oberlin had drilled into every student. Something was wrong with these books. Very wrong. Jake knocked again. "Ma'am, the men are talking about moving on. No pay in 2 weeks. No leadership. They got families to feed." Adeline set down the ledger. Through the bedroom door, she could hear Silas muttering in his fever sleep. The man who had saved her from certain ruin now faced his own destruction. She walked outside to where the ranch hands waited. 6 men in worn clothes and worried faces. They looked at her with barely concealed skepticism. "Gather everyone. We have work to do." "Ma'am, with respect, this ain't woman's work." Adeline fixed Jake with a stare that reminded him of his old schoolmarm back in Missouri. "The cattle need proper rotation to prevent overgrazing. The feed bills are inflated because we're buying inferior grain at premium prices. The fencing fails because it's placed wrong for the terrain." The men exchanged glances. "How do you know all that?" asked Pete, the youngest hand. Adeline had hidden her education since arriving. It seemed safer to let them assume she was just another frontier wife. But safety was a luxury they could no longer afford. I studied agricultural science at Oberlin College. 4 years of soil composition, livestock management, and land economics. The silence stretched long enough for a hawk to circle overhead twice. "You're saying you got book learning?" Jake's voice carried doubt but also desperate hope. "More than book learning. I helped run experimental farms in Ohio, increased yields by 40% using proper crop rotation and selective breeding." Adeline walked to the broken fence line. "This fence fails because it fights the natural water flow instead of working with it. Move it 15 feet east and angle it to follow the ridge line. The cattle will naturally stay contained." She pointed to the scattered feed. "That grain is mostly chaff. You're paying top dollar for bottom quality. I know suppliers in Kansas who can deliver better feed for half the cost." Pete scratched his head. "But you're a woman." "Yes, a woman with the knowledge to save this ranch." Adeline spent the rest of the morning walking the property with the hands. She showed them soil patterns that indicated mineral deficiencies, water flow that could be redirected for better irrigation, pasture sections that needed rest to recover. Her confidence grew with each observation. The years of study came flooding back. Professor Henderson's lectures on sustainable farming, Dr. Williams's research on cattle breeding, the experimental plots she had managed during her final year. By afternoon, even Jake was asking questions instead of raising objections. How'd a colored woman get into a college like Oberlin? Adeline paused in her examination of a sick calf. "My father was a freedman who learned to read during the war. He saved every penny for 10 years to send me north. Said education was the one thing nobody could take away." The calf's symptoms were clear. Mineral deficiency from poor grazing, easily fixed with proper supplements and rotated pasture. "My professors didn't care about my color, they cared about my work." She stood and brushed dirt from her hands. "This calf needs copper supplements, so do probably half the herd. That's why they're underweight and prone to illness." Jake whistled low. "You can tell all that from just looking. Training, practice, and paying attention to details." By evening, Adeline had reorganized the work schedule, divided the pastures into sections for proper rotation, identified 3 suppliers who could provide better materials for less money, calculated a feeding program that would restore the herd's health within 2 months. The ranch hands worked with new purpose. Word spread to neighboring properties. Women came by with excuses to borrow sugar, but really to see the educated woman who was transforming the McAllister ranch. Some whispered disapproval. Others watched with curious respect. Inside the cabin, Silas's fever finally broke on the 4th night. He woke to find Adeline asleep at his bedside, ledgers spread across her lap covered in neat calculations. Through the window, he could see fence posts standing straight for the first time in months, cattle grazing in organized sections, his hands working with enthusiasm he had not seen in years. "What happened while I was sick?" Adeline stirred and opened her eyes. "We saved the ranch." The transformation of the McAllister ranch became impossible to ignore. Within 6 weeks, the cattle had gained weight and vitality. The pastures showed new growth from Adeline's rotation system. Fence lines stood strong against the prairie winds. Silas watched his wife direct the morning work with quiet amazement. She moved between tasks with the confidence of someone born to leadership. Her education had given her tools he never knew existed. "The northeast pasture is ready for rotation," she told Jake. "Move the yearlings there and let the south section rest another week." Jake nodded without question. The other hands had stopped doubting her weeks ago when her methods started producing results. But success bred resentment beyond the ranch boundaries. Bartholomew Cross rode up to the property line on a gray stallion that cost more than most men earned in a year. His ranch sprawled across thousands of acres to the west. His cattle bore the finest brands. His influence reached into every business in town. He found Silas mending a gate that actually stayed closed now. Heard you got yourself quite the helper. Silas straightened. Cross's tone carried an edge sharper than barbed wire. My wife knows her business. That's what troubles folks. Ain't natural for a woman to be giving orders to men, especially not her kind of woman. Her kind saved my ranch. Cross's smile held no warmth. For now, but success like this upsets the natural order, makes other women get ideas above their station. He wheeled his horse around. Communities got standards, McAllister. Best remember that. The first sign of organized opposition came at the general store. Mrs. Patterson, who had sold supplies to Silas for 3 years, suddenly found her shelves bare whenever he appeared. Supply wagon's late, she would say, not meeting his eyes. The feed store developed similar problems. The blacksmith became too busy for repairs. The bank teller found reasons to delay routine transactions. Adeline recognized the pattern immediately. They're trying to strangle us economically. She stood in their kitchen, surrounded by ledgers and correspondence. Her network of suppliers in Kansas and Colorado had become their lifeline. Cross has influence, but he doesn't control everything. Letters arrived daily from struggling farmers asking for advice. Small ranchers who had heard rumors of her methods. Mexican families who worked the hardscrabble land to the south. Even some Cheyenne traders who remembered her fair dealings. Adeline rode out to visit them all. At the Rodriguez farm, she found Maria tending a vegetable garden that barely produced enough to feed the family. The soil needs lime to reduce acidity, Adeline explained. Plant beans in that section. They'll add nitrogen naturally. She showed Maria how to test soil with simple tools, how to rotate crops for maximum yield, where to find lime deposits in the nearby hills. Within a month, the Rodriguez garden flourished. Word spread through networks that bypassed the established power structure, whispered conversations in Spanish, hand signals between indigenous traders, messages carried by women who gathered at the creek for washing. The outcasts were organizing. Cross called a meeting at the church on a Sunday evening. The pews filled with the town's most influential families. Banker Cornelius Whitmore sat in the front row, his silver watch chain catching lamplight. "We got a problem," Cross announced. "This mixed marriage is spreading dangerous ideas." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Women thinking they can run ranches, coloreds getting above their station, foreigners expecting equal treatment. Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously. She's teaching Mexican women to read, teaching them to demand fair prices for their goods. She's making our wives ask questions, added the feed store owner. Why can't they manage money like her? Why can't they have a say in business decisions? Whitmore rose to speak. His voice carried the smooth authority of a man who controlled other men's debts. The McAllister situation threatens the stability we've worked to build. If we allow this precedent, where does it end? He gestured toward the stained glass window. God established natural hierarchies, man over woman, white over colored, civilized over savage. When we blur those lines, chaos follows. The crowd rumbled approval. I propose we make it clear that certain behaviors won't be tolerated. Economic pressure first, then legal challenges to their marriage if necessary. Cross smiled with predatory satisfaction. Already started the economic pressure, but the legal angle's interesting. That marriage happened mighty fast, might not be valid under territorial law. Outside the church, shadows moved between the buildings. Maria Rodriguez pressed her ear to a crack in the wall. Young Pete from the McAllister ranch crouched behind a wagon. Word would reach Adeline before the meeting ended. Back at the ranch, Silas found his wife reading by lamplight. The kitchen table was covered with legal documents and territorial statutes. They're coming for us. Adeline looked up from a thick book of marriage laws. Then we'd better be ready. She had been expecting this escalation. Her success had made too many enemies. Her methods threatened too many assumptions about who could lead and who must follow. What did you find? Our marriage is legal under both territorial and federal law, but they'll challenge it anyway, force us to prove it in court while they destroy us financially. Silas sat across from her, Maybe I should have left you at that station. Adeline's eyes flashed with steel. Then we both would have failed. Separately, we're vulnerable. Together, we have a chance. She pulled out a map of the county with property lines marked in different colors. Cross doesn't just want to destroy us. He wants our land. But he's not the only one playing this game. Her finger traced connections between properties. Look at the pattern. Every struggling ranch he's targeted sits along the proposed railroad route. Every family he's pressured into selling had land with water rights. Silas studied the map. You think this is bigger than just us? I think we've stumbled into something much larger and much more dangerous. Adeline spread the financial records across the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle. Each document told part of a larger story that grew more disturbing with every connection she made. The pattern was subtle but unmistakable. Loan payments that disappeared from bank records, property assessments that doubled overnight, foreclosures that happened weeks before official notices were filed. She traced the railroad survey maps with her finger. Every property Cross had acquired in the past 2 years sat directly in the path of the proposed western extension. Every struggling rancher who had sold to Whitmore's bank owned land with crucial water rights. The door creaked open. Silas entered with mud on his boots and worry in his eyes. Jake just rode in with news from town. The territorial judge is coming next week. Cross filed papers challenging our marriage. Adeline barely looked up from her calculations. Expected that. What else? Maria Rodriguez came by. Her husband got a visit from the bank. They're calling in his loan early. Now Adeline's attention sharpened. The Rodriguez farm isn't worth enough to justify that kind of pressure. She pulled out the survey map and found their property. Her blood chilled. Unless you need their land for something else. The Rodriguez farm controlled access to the river ford. Any railroad coming through would need that crossing. Silas leaned over her shoulder to study the map. How many families are we talking about? Adeline had been making lists for days. Names, dates, amounts, connections. 17 so far, all small ranchers or farmers, all with land the railroad needs, all pressured by Whitmore's bank or Cross's influence. She opened a thick folder filled with correspondence. I wrote to my former professor at Oberlin. He has connections with Eastern investors. Turns out this railroad deal involves more money than the entire territory sees in 5 years. The scale of the conspiracy was staggering. Federal land grants worth millions. Construction contracts that would make fortunes. Political influence that reached all the way to Washington. Cross and Whitmore are just the local operators. The real power sits in Chicago and New York. Silas sank into his chair. How do we fight something that big? Adeline had been asking herself the same question. 2 people against a network of wealth and influence that spanned half the continent. We start with what we can prove. Document everything. Build a case that even corrupt judges can't ignore. She pulled out a letter that had arrived that morning. I also wrote to the territorial attorney general. He's sending an investigator, but quietly. Too many powerful people have stakes in this. The next few days brought a stream of visitors to the ranch, families who had lost their land, farmers facing impossible loan terms, workers who had been cheated out of wages. Each story added another piece to the puzzle. Old Henrik Larson had owned a homestead for 12 years before the bank suddenly discovered a flaw in his deed. The property reverted to territorial control and was immediately sold to Cross at auction. The Yamamoto family had their water rights challenged in court while they were traveling to visit relatives. By the time they returned, their irrigation was blocked and their crops had died. 3 different Mexican families received eviction notices written in English only, with impossible deadlines that had already passed when the papers were served. Adeline documented every case with the thoroughness of a trained researcher. Names, dates, witnesses, financial records. The pattern of deliberate dispossession was undeniable, but the most shocking revelation came from an unexpected source. Thomas Whitfield appeared at their door on a rain-soaked Thursday evening. The man who had rejected Adeline at the train station looked haggard and desperate. "I need to tell you something." Silas stepped protectively closer to his wife. "You said enough at the station. That's what I need to explain." Thomas's hands shook as he removed his hat. "They paid me to reject her, $50 to make sure the marriage didn't happen." Adeline felt the world shift beneath her feet. "Who paid you?" "Whitmore. Said there were complications with her family's land back east. If she stayed married and settled, it would interfere with some business deal." The implications hit Adeline like physical blows. "What land?" Thomas pulled out a crumpled telegram. "Your father owned mineral rights in Pennsylvania. Coal deposits worth a fortune, but the rights only transfer to married daughters or direct male heirs." Adeline's father had died 2 years ago. She was his only child. If you stayed unmarried and isolated out here, the rights would eventually revert to the state. Whitmore's partners could buy them for almost nothing. The conspiracy wasn't just local, it was personal. They had orchestrated her abandonment to steal her inheritance. When that failed and she married Silas anyway, they had turned to destroying her new life through economic pressure and social isolation. "Why are you telling me this now?" Thomas's voice cracked. "Because they're done with me too. Whitmore threatened my family, said if I ever talked, we'd lose everything just like the others." He looked directly at Adeline for the first time. "I was wrong to reject you, wrong to take their money, but I got children to think about." After Thomas left, Adeline and Silas sat in stunned silence. The scope of the plot against them was breathtaking in its cruelty and calculation. "They've been planning this for years," Adeline whispered. She thought about her father's death, the urgent letters encouraging her to leave Pennsylvania, the convenient mail-order marriage arrangement that would take her far from anyone who might help her understand her rights. "Every step was designed to isolate me and steal what my father left." Silas reached across the table and took her hand. "What do we do now?" Adeline squeezed his fingers with grim determination. "We fight back, with everything we've learned and everyone we've helped." She looked at the stack of evidence covering their table. "They made one mistake. They underestimated what happens when you unite people who have nothing left to lose." The church bell rang at 7 o'clock sharp, calling the town to what Cross had advertised as a meeting about community values and moral standards. The pews filled quickly with familiar faces: merchants and ranchers, wives in their Sunday dresses, men who controlled the economic life of Clearwater. Cross stood at the front with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Whitmore sat in the front row, gold watch chain gleaming in the lamplight. "Friends, we gather tonight to address a threat to everything we've built here." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "The McAllister situation has gone too far. Mixed marriages leading to unnatural arrangements, women overstepping their proper roles, foreign influences corrupting our way of life." Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously from her seat near the back. "I've seen it myself. That woman teaching Mexican families to read, filling their heads with ideas above their station." Cross smiled with satisfaction. "Exactly the kind of dangerous thinking we need to stop." The church doors opened with a loud creak. Every head turned as Adeline McAllister walked down the center aisle with measured steps. Her dress was simple but clean, her back straight despite the hostile stares. Behind her came a steady stream of people Cross had not expected. Maria Rodriguez with her 3 children, Henrik Larson clutching his foreclosure papers, the Yamamoto family still bearing the marks of their destroyed farm. 24 faces representing every family that had suffered under Cross's schemes. Cross's confidence flickered. "This is a private meeting for community members." Adeline reached the front of the church and turned to face the crowd. "We are community members. Some of us have lived here longer than you." She opened a leather satchel and pulled out a stack of documents. "You called this meeting to discuss threats to our community. I agree, we do have threats, but they don't come from mixed marriages or women with education." Cross stepped toward her. "You have no right to disrupt this gathering." "I have every right, especially since this meeting concerns crimes committed against me and these families." Adeline held up the first document, forged loan papers that changed interest rates after signing. Henrik Larsson lost his homestead because someone altered his deed while he slept. Henrik stood up in the crowd. She's telling the truth. I got the original deed right here. Dates don't match what the bank recorded. Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in his seat. These are serious accusations without proof. Adeline smiled with the confidence of someone who had done her homework thoroughly. I have proof. Letters between you and your Chicago partners discussing mineral rights in Pennsylvania. Correspondence about railroad routes that required specific properties. Telegram records showing payments to Thomas Whitfield for rejecting me at the station. The church fell silent, except for the sound of rain beginning on the roof. You orchestrated my abandonment to steal my inheritance. When that failed, you tried to destroy my marriage to accomplish the same goal. She pulled out a map of the territory with colored pins marking each affected property. Every family you've cheated owns land the railroad needs. Every foreclosure benefits the same group of Eastern investors. Every manipulation serves the same conspiracy. Maria Rodriguez stood up. She helped save my farm when the bank tried to steal it, taught me to read the papers they wanted me to sign blind. Other voices joined from the crowd. She showed us how to test soil properly, helped us get fair prices for our grain, taught us to keep proper records so no one could cheat us. Cross's face reddened with anger. You're listening to the ravings of an unnatural woman and a bunch of foreigners. Adeline's voice cut through his bluster like a knife. I'm a graduate of Oberlin College with 4 years of agricultural science and business training. These families are American citizens with the same rights as anyone in this room. She held up a thick folder. I've sent copies of all evidence to the Territorial Attorney General, also to federal investigators in Washington, also to newspaper editors in Denver and Chicago. Whitmore jumped to his feet. Those are private business matters. You have no legal standing to interfere. I have standing as a property owner whose inheritance you tried to steal, as a citizen whose civil rights you violated, as a woman whose marriage you tried to destroy through fraud. The crowd was murmuring now, some with anger at Adeline's accusations, others with growing understanding of what had been done in their community's name. Adeline opened her final document. This telegram arrived this morning from the territorial capital. Federal marshals are already investigating irregularities in land transfers and railroad contracts. Several warrants have been issued. Cross and Whitmore exchanged alarmed glances. Furthermore, the Pennsylvania courts have recognized my legal claim to my father's mineral rights. The Eastern investors who thought they could steal that land are facing federal fraud charges. She folded the telegram carefully. Your conspiracy is finished. The only question now is whether this community will stand with the criminals or with justice. Old Mrs. Fletcher stood up in the middle pews. I seen what that woman did for the Rodriguez family. Turned their failing farm into something profitable. That ain't criminal behavior. Jake Morrison rose from the back. She saved the McAllister Ranch with honest work and smart planning. That's more than some folks around here can claim. More voices joined the growing chorus of support. People who had been silent observers were finding courage to speak. The balance of power in the room was shifting with each testimony. Cross made one final desperate attempt. Don't let them fool you. This is about preserving our way of life against outside agitators. Adeline's response was quiet but carried to every corner of the church. This is about choosing between truth and lies, between justice and corruption, between a community that protects all its members and one that sacrifices the weak for the benefit of the powerful. The rain drummed harder on the roof as Clearwater prepared to make its choice. The federal marshals arrived 3 days after the church meeting. They came quietly, without fanfare, but word spread quickly through the community. Whitmore was arrested at his bank while burning documents. Cross tried to flee toward Colorado but was caught at the territorial border. The evidence Adeline had gathered proved devastating in federal court. Forged deeds, manipulated loan documents, and correspondence detailing the conspiracy filled boxes that investigators carted away. The Eastern investors faced charges in multiple states. Within a month, the seized properties were returned to their rightful owners. The Yamamoto family reclaimed their water rights. Henrik Larsson got his homestead back with compensation for his losses. 17 families found justice after years of systematic theft. The railroad deal collapsed when investigators discovered the illegal land acquisitions at its foundation. New proposals would require fair compensation and proper legal procedures. Adeline's inheritance case in Pennsylvania was resolved swiftly once the federal investigation exposed the conspiracy. The mineral rights her father had left her were worth more than she had ever imagined, enough to secure their future and help rebuild the community. But the most profound changes came in the hearts and minds of Clearwater's residents. Mrs. Patterson reopened her store to all customers without discrimination. The feed store owner began ordering better quality grain at Adeline's recommendation. Even the bank, under new management, started offering fair terms to small farmers and ranchers. The transformation was not universal or instant. Some families left town rather than accept the new reality. Others grumbled about changes to the established order, but the majority chose progress over prejudice. Adeline established a school that welcomed children regardless of their background. She taught reading, mathematics, and agricultural science to anyone willing to learn. Her classroom became a symbol of what the community could become. Maria Rodriguez learned to read well enough to help other Spanish-speaking families understand legal documents. Henrik Larsson's son enrolled in advanced mathematics classes. The Yamamoto children excelled in both languages and shared their family's farming techniques with classmates. Silas found his role evolving too. The man who had offered marriage out of loneliness and duty discovered genuine love and partnership. He learned to see strength in vulnerability, wisdom in humility, and leadership in service to others. Their ranch became a model operation that attracted visitors from across the territory. Agricultural colleges sent students to study Adeline's methods. Government officials sought her advice on land use policies. Railroad companies hired her to assess fair compensation for property acquisitions. But perhaps the most meaningful changes happened in small moments. When Jake Morrison's daughter asked to learn about soil chemistry, no one questioned whether girls could understand science. When Mexican families joined the church congregation, they were welcomed rather than tolerated. When new settlers arrived by train, they found help instead of hostility. The anniversary of Adeline's arrival approached with the turning seasons. The train station that had witnessed her humiliation now bore a small plaque recognizing her contributions to the community. The bench where she had sat abandoned was painted and maintained by grateful neighbors. On a warm spring morning exactly 1 year later, Adeline and Silas stood on that same platform. But this time, they were welcoming newcomers rather than facing abandonment. A young Irish family stepped off the train, bewildered by the vast prairie landscape. Their clothes were worn and their resources clearly limited. Some passengers gave them the same dismissive looks Adeline remembered too well. "Welcome to Clearwater," Adeline said, approaching with genuine warmth. The woman clutched her baby closer, uncertain about this well-dressed black lady who spoke with authority and kindness. "We're the McAllisters. Can we help you get settled?" Within hours, the Irish family had temporary housing, information about available work, and connections to other community members who could ease their transition. No one would face what Adeline had endured if she could prevent it. The school year ended with a community celebration that brought together families who had been divided by prejudice and fear. Children performed songs in 3 languages. Adults shared food representing traditions from around the world. Former enemies found common ground and shared hopes for their children's futures. As evening approached, Adeline found herself back at the train station with Silas. They sat on the bench where their marriage had begun, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and crimson. "Any regrets?" Silas asked. Adeline considered the question seriously. The past year had brought challenges that would have broken weaker partnerships. Public scrutiny, economic pressure, and personal attacks that targeted their deepest vulnerabilities. But it had also brought victories that neither could have achieved alone. A community transformed, families restored, children learning that their worth was not determined by their appearance or background but by their character and contributions. "No regrets," she said finally. A freight train whistled in the distance, carrying goods and dreams across the expanding nation. Some of those dreams would be shattered by prejudice and greed. Others would flourish in communities that chose justice over convenience, truth over tradition. Clearwater had made its choice. The abandoned bride and the struggling rancher had become leaders of a transformation that would ripple across the territory for generations to come. They walked home together as stars appeared in the darkening sky, partners in every sense of the word, architects of a future built on dignity, education, and the radical idea that everyone deserved a chance to prove their worth. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as they approached. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities. Children to teach, families to help, a community to nurture. But tonight, they had earned their rest in the knowledge that abandoned dreams could bloom into realities more beautiful than anything they had originally dared to imagine.